The August sun beat down on the dusty platform of Hillsboro, New Mexico, as Adelaide Lancaster stepped off the train with nothing but the worn leather trunk at her feet and a crumpled letter in her gloved hand, wondering if she had made the worst decision of her 22 years by traveling 1,500 miles to marry a man she had never met. The platform was nearly empty, except for a few ranch hands loading cattle into the rear cars and an elderly woman selling dried flowers from a basket. Adelaide's blue cotton dress clung to her back, damp with perspiration, and she could feel the sun burning the part in her hair where her bonnet failed to provide coverage. She clutched the letter tighter, reading the words for perhaps the 100th time since leaving Philadelphia 3 weeks ago. The handwriting was neat and practical, the words sparse but kind. Harold Bennett had promised her a home, respectability, and a fresh start far from the scandal that had driven her west. He had sent money for the train ticket and assured her that someone would meet her at the station. But now, standing alone on this platform in a town that seemed to consist of little more than a main street lined with wooden buildings, Adelaide felt the first real stirrings of panic. What if Harold had changed his mind? What if this was all some elaborate scheme? She had no money for return passage, no family to wire for help. Her parents had made it clear that leaving was her only option after breaking her engagement to Thomas Whitmore, the son of her father's business partner. Never mind that Thomas had been carrying on with the housekeeper for months. Adelaide's refusal to overlook his indiscretions had somehow become her failing, not his. She was about to sit down on her trunk when she heard the sound of boots on wood. A man was walking toward her, with long, purposeful strides. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his dust-covered shirt. A black hat shadowed his face, but she could see a strong jaw and the glint of blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore worn leather chaps over dark trousers, and a gun belt sat low on his hips. Everything about him spoke of the frontier, of hard work and harder living. He stopped a few feet away, and Adelaide noticed he held his hat in his hands now, revealing thick dark hair that was slightly too long and curled at his collar. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He looked confused, almost troubled. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "I am looking for Adelaide Lancaster. Harold Bennett asked me to meet the train." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by confusion. "I am Adelaide Lancaster, but where is Mr. Bennett?" Something flickered across the man's face, an emotion she could not quite read. He glanced down at his hat, turning it in his hands, then met her eyes again. "I am Asher Kendrick, madam. Harold's ranch borders mine to the east. I am afraid I have some difficult news." Adelaide felt the platform tilt beneath her feet. "Is he unwell?" "Harold passed on 3 days ago, Miss Lancaster. His heart gave out while he was mending fence. It was quick. He did not suffer." Asher's voice was gentle despite its roughness, and his eyes held genuine sympathy. "I am sorry you came all this way. If you need passage back east, I will see that you get it." The world seemed to narrow to a single point. Adelaide heard the words, understood them, but could not quite process what they meant. Harold Bennett was dead. The man she had agreed to marry, sight unseen, was gone before she ever laid eyes on him. She was alone in New Mexico, with no prospects, no home, and no future. "Miss Lancaster?" Asher stepped closer, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right? Maybe you should sit down." "I am fine," she said automatically, though she was anything but. Her mind was racing, calculating possibilities and finding none that offered any real hope. "I appreciate your kindness in delivering the news, Mr. Kendrick. If you could direct me to the nearest hotel, I will impose upon you no further." "Hotel is full up," he said quietly. "There is a cattle drive passing through, and every room in town is spoken for." He hesitated, clearly weighing his words carefully. "Harold was a good man and a good friend. He told me about you, said he was bringing a bride out from Philadelphia. He was excited, happier than I had seen him in years. I know he would not want you left stranded." Adelaide lifted her chin, trying to maintain some dignity even as desperation clawed at her throat. "I am not your responsibility, Mr. Kendrick." "Maybe not," he agreed, "but you were going to be Harold's wife, and that means something out here. Folks look after each other in this territory." He glanced at the trunk at her feet, then back at her face. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who has been with me for 5 years. She is getting on in years and could use help. The work is hard, but room and board come with it, and I pay fair wages. You could stay until you figure out what you want to do next." It was charity, Adelaide knew, dressed up as employment. Her pride wanted to refuse, but survival trumped pride. She had $23 to her name, not enough to live on for more than a week or two, certainly not enough to book passage back to a city where she was no longer welcome. At least if she worked for Asher Kendrick, she would have a roof over her head while she considered her options. "That is very generous," she said carefully. "I accept, though I insist on earning my keep. I am not afraid of hard work." Something in his expression softened. "I did not figure you were, coming all this way alone." He bent and lifted her trunk as though it weighed nothing, settling it on one shoulder with easy strength. "My wagon is just down the street. We should get going before the worst heat of the day sets in." Adelaide followed him off the platform and down the dusty main street of Hillsboro. The town was small but looked prosperous enough, with a general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, and various other businesses lining both sides of the wide street. People moved slowly in the heat, seeking shade where they could find it. A few glanced at her with curiosity, no doubt wondering who the strange woman was and why Asher Kendrick was carrying her trunk. The wagon was a sturdy affair, built for work rather than comfort. Asher loaded her trunk into the back with practiced efficiency, then offered his hand to help her up to the bench seat. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm and steady. Adelaide settled onto the hard wooden seat, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. Asher climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion. They left Hillsboro behind, heading north across a landscape that was beautiful in its stark emptiness. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the afternoon heat. The land rolled in gentle swells covered with scrub brush and dotted with the occasional twisted juniper. The sky was a blue so intense it almost hurt to look at, unmarred by even a wisp of cloud. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon, the plodding of horse hooves, and the occasional call of a bird Adelaide did not recognize. She was acutely aware of the man beside her, of the competent way he handled the team, of the subtle scent of leather and horse and something else, something clean like sage. He had not put his hat back on, and she found herself sneaking glances at his profile when she thought he was not looking. He had the kind of face that would have turned heads even in Philadelphia, though it was too rugged, too masculine for the society drawing rooms she had once frequented. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, and another along his jaw, souvenirs of a hard life lived outdoors. "How long were you and Harold friends?" she asked, partly out of genuine curiosity, and partly to break the awkward silence. "Going on 7 years," Asher replied, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "I bought my ranch from a man heading back east in 1875. Harold's place was already established. He helped me learn the territory, introduced me to the other ranchers, showed me where the water was reliable." He paused, his jaw tightening. "He was a good neighbor, one of the best men I have known." "Did he have family?" "A sister back in Kansas City. I sent her a telegram yesterday. She is arranging for his affairs." Asher glanced at her briefly. "I suppose technically you could claim some right to his property, you being his intended bride." "I would do no such thing," Adelaide said quickly, horrified at the suggestion. "I never met the man. I have no claim to anything of his." Asher nodded as though this confirmed something he had been thinking. "That speaks well of your character, Miss Lancaster. There are folks who would see opportunity in tragedy. I am not one of them." "One," she said firmly. "And please, call me Adelaide. Given the circumstances, formality seems unnecessary." "Adelaide," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his rough drawl. "You can call me Asher then. No point in standing on ceremony when you will be working in my house." "Tell me about Mrs. Chen," Adelaide said, eager to think about practical matters rather than the mess her life had become. "You said she is your housekeeper?" "She is, though she does more than keep house. She is a fine cook, tends the vegetable garden, keeps everything running smooth. Her husband Chen Wei works on the ranch, has been my foreman for 5 years. They came out from California after the railroad was finished. Good people, hardest workers I have ever known." He shifted on the seat, adjusting his grip on the reins. "They have a daughter, May, about 14. Sweet girl, helps her mother with the house and learning her letters from the schoolteacher in town." Adelaide relaxed slightly. A family living on the ranch made the situation feel more proper, less like she was imposing on a bachelor's household. It sounds like you have built a good life here. I like to think so, Asher said. It is not easy country, but it is honest. You work hard, the land provides. You do right by people, they do right by you. He fell silent for a moment, then added, Can I ask what made you agree to come west? Harold said you were from a good family in Philadelphia. Seems like you would have had prospects back there. Adelaide stared out at the vast landscape, trying to find words that would not shame her further. Sometimes the right thing and the expected thing are not the same. I chose what I thought was right, and it cost me everything I knew. Harold offered me a fresh start with no questions asked. It seemed like providence. And now? Now I will make my own way, she said, with more confidence than she felt. I may have been raised to pour tea and play the piano forte, but I am not afraid to learn new skills. Whatever Mrs. Chen needs help with, I will do my best. Asher looked at her then, really looked at her, and Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. I believe you will, he said quietly. You have grit, I can see that. You will need it out here. They continued on, the wagon following a well-worn track across the rangeland. Adelaide saw cattle in the distance, red and brown shapes moving slowly across the scrubland. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. The mountains grew closer, their peaks jagged against the blue sky. It was so different from everything she had known, so raw and untamed. Part of her was terrified. Another part, a part she had not known existed until this moment, felt something that might have been excitement. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a smudge of green in the distance, then resolving into buildings and trees. There was a main house, low and rambling, built of adobe with a red tile roof, outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and various sheds. Cottonwood trees provided shade, their leaves rustling in the hot breeze. A vegetable garden stretched behind the house, green and thriving despite the harsh climate. Asher pulled the wagon up in front of the main house just as a woman emerged from the front door. She was small and thin, probably in her 50s, with gray-streaked black hair pulled into a neat bun. Her face was lined but kind, her dark eyes sharp and assessing as she took in Adelaide. Mrs. Chen, Asher said, climbing down from the wagon and moving to help Adelaide descend. This is Adelaide Lancaster. She came out from Philadelphia to marry Harold Bennett. Mrs. Chen's expression shifted to one of deep sympathy. Ah, so sad. Mr. Bennett was good man. You have my condolences, Miss Lancaster. Thank you, Adelaide said, accepting the older woman's bow with one of her own. Asher has kindly offered me employment. I hope my presence will not be an imposition. No imposition, Mrs. Chen said firmly. I am not as young as I used to be. Help is welcome. Come, I will show you where you will sleep. Then we will have tea and talk about work. Asher lifted Adelaide's trunk again and followed them into the house. The interior was cool and dim after the bright sunlight, with thick walls that kept out the heat. The main room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large fireplace, sturdy furniture, and colorful woven rugs on the floor. It was a masculine space, but not unwelcoming. Mrs. Chen led Adelaide down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It held a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a small window that looked out over the garden. The walls were whitewashed, the floor clean. It was spare but more than adequate. This was May's room, Mrs. Chen explained, but she moved to the bunkhouse with us last year when she got older. You will be comfortable here, I think. It is perfect, Adelaide said honestly. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Asher set the trunk down at the foot of the bed. I will leave you ladies to get acquainted. Adelaide, if you need anything, just ask Mrs. Chen. She runs this house better than I ever could. He tipped his hat to both of them and left, his bootsteps echoing down the hallway. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. Mr. Kendrick is good man, like Mr. Bennett. You are lucky he found you. Now, unpack what you need and come to kitchen. We will have tea and sweet cakes, and I will tell you about the work. Left alone, Adelaide sank down on the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the day. She had arrived in New Mexico expecting to become a wife, to start a new life as Mrs. Harold Bennett. Instead, she was a housekeeper on the ranch of a man she had just met, with no clear idea of what her future held. It should have felt like a disaster. Somehow, sitting in this simple room with the late afternoon sun slanting through the window, it felt like possibility. She opened her trunk and pulled out her other dress, 2 nightgowns, and her few personal possessions. Everything she owned in the world fit in one trunk, a humbling realization. Back in Philadelphia, she had had a wardrobe full of dresses, shelves of books, drawers of jewelry and trinkets. Her mother had made her leave it all behind, said she was bringing shame on the family and deserved nothing from them. Adelaide had been too proud to argue, too hurt to beg. She had taken what she could carry and left the rest, walking away from 22 years of life without looking back. She changed from her travel-stained dress into the simpler gray cotton one, splashed water on her face from the basin on the washstand, and repinned her hair. Then she made her way to the kitchen, following the sound of Mrs. Chen moving about. The kitchen was large and well organized, with a big cast-iron stove, a long work table, and shelves lined with jars and tins. Mrs. Chen was setting out cups and a plate of small cakes that smelled of honey and spice. She gestured for Adelaide to sit at the table. "You drink tea?" Mrs. Chen asked. "I do, thank you." Mrs. Chen poured from a ceramic pot, and Adelaide recognized the fragrant, slightly bitter scent of good Chinese tea. She accepted the cup gratefully, taking a sip and feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I will be honest with you," Mrs. Chen said, sitting down across from her. "Work here is hard. Mr. Kendrick raises cattle, some horses. Ranch is big, covers many miles. There are hired men, usually 6 or 7, who eat here. I cook 3 meals a day, every day. I do washing on Mondays, ironing on Tuesdays, baking on Wednesdays. There is always cleaning, always mending, always something needs doing. My husband and May help when they can, but they have their own work." "I understand," Adelaide said. "In Philadelphia, I was taught to manage a household, though I confess we had servants to do the actual labor. But I am willing to learn. If you show me what needs to be done, I will do it to the best of my ability." Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. "You have soft hands," she observed, "not used to hard work. But I see determination in your eyes. That is good. I will teach you and you will learn. In time, your hands will grow strong like mine." She held up her own hands, small but powerful, marked by years of labor. "When do I start?" Adelaide asked. "Tomorrow is soon enough. Today you rest from your journey. Unpack, look around, get comfortable. Dinner is at 6. Mr. Kendrick and the men will come in then. You should meet them, so they know who you are." "Mrs." Chen smiled slightly. "Some of the men are rough, but they are respectful. Mr. Kendrick does not tolerate bad behavior in his house or toward women. You will be safe here." Safety was something Adelaide had not realized she craved until it was offered. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for your kindness. We are all far from home here," the older woman said softly. "We must take care of each other. That is the way of this place." Adelaide spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the house and the area around it. The ranch was impressive in its quiet efficiency. The barn was well maintained, the horses healthy and calm. The cattle she could see in the near pastures looked fat and content. Everything spoke of careful management and hard work. She walked through the garden, marveling at how anything could grow in such heat. But the rows of vegetables were thriving, fed by an irrigation system that Mrs. Chen explained came from a spring in the nearby hills. There were tomatoes, squash, beans, onions, and various herbs. It was a testament to persistence and knowledge. At 6 o'clock, Adelaide helped Mrs. Chen carry platters of food to the dining room. There was roasted beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and stewed vegetables. The table was long enough to seat a dozen people. Adelaide hung back nervously as boots thundered on the porch and men filed in. They were a varied group, ranging in age from a boy who could not have been much past 18 to a grizzled older man with a beard down to his chest. They removed their hats and washed their hands at the basin by the door before taking their seats. Asher came in last, his eyes finding Adelaide immediately. "Men," he said, his voice carrying easily over the general commotion. "This is Adelaide Lancaster. She will be helping Mrs. Chen around the house. I expect you to treat her with respect." His tone was mild, but there was steel underneath that, made it clear this was not a suggestion. There was a chorus of, "Yes, sir," and "Pleased to meet you, madam." The men seemed genuinely welcoming if a bit curious. Adelaide took a seat at the far end of the table, next to Mrs. Chen, and tried not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. Dinner was a lively affair, with conversation flowing easily. The men talked about the work of the day, about cattle that had wandered, about a fence that needed mending, about the weather and when the next rain might come. Asher listened more than he spoke, but when he did say something, the men paid attention. He was clearly respected, not just obeyed. Adelaide found herself watching him when she thought no one would notice. There was something compelling about the way he moved, the easy confidence he radiated. He was younger than she had first thought, probably not much past 30. His hands, wrapped around his coffee cup, were strong and capable. When he laughed at something one of the men said, his whole face transformed, the hard lines softening into something warm and genuine. She caught Mrs. Chen watching her watch Asher and felt heat rush to her cheeks. The older woman's expression was knowing, but not unkind. Adelaide quickly looked down at her plate. After dinner, the men filed out, thanking Mrs. Chen for the meal as they went. Asher lingered, helping to stack the dishes despite Mrs. Chen's protests. "You pay me to cook, not to clean up after myself," she scolded, but her tone was fond. "I will help how I want to help," Asher replied easily. He glanced at Adelaide. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. Everyone has been kind." "Good." He set the last of the plates on the sideboard. "Mrs. Chen will keep you busy, but if you need anything, my office is just off the main room. Do not hesitate to ask." "I will not impose," Adelaide said automatically. Asher's expression was hard to read. "It is not an imposition to ask for help when you need it. That is something you will have to learn out here. We rely on each other. Pride can get you killed in this territory." It was a rebuke, however gentle, and Adelaide felt it land. "I will remember that." He nodded and left, the screen door banging shut behind him. Mrs. Chen chuckled softly. "Mr. Kendrick is direct," she said. "It takes some getting used to, but he is right. This is not Philadelphia. Different rules here." Adelaide helped with the dishes, learning where everything was kept and how Mrs. Chen liked things organized. By the time they finished, she was exhausted, her feet aching and her back sore from the long day of travel. She bid Mrs. Chen good night and made her way to her small room. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and the night air coming through the window was cool and sweet. Adelaide lay in the darkness, listening to unfamiliar sounds. Somewhere an owl called. Horses moved in the corral. The house creaked and settled. She thought about Harold Bennett, the man she had never met, but who had offered her salvation in her darkest hour. She hoped he had known some happiness before his heart gave out. She hoped his last days had been peaceful. And then, unbidden, her thoughts turned to Asher Kendrick. There was something about him that drew her, something beyond his obvious strength and competence. He had kind eyes, she realized. For all his rough exterior, there was kindness there. It was evident in how he treated Mrs. Chen, how his men respected rather than feared him, how he had not hesitated to help a stranger in need. Adelaide fell asleep thinking about blue eyes and a slow drawl, and dreamed of wide-open spaces under an endless sky. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Adelaide woke before dawn and helped Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. She learned to cook not the delicate dishes of Philadelphia society, but hearty fare that would fuel men through long days of hard labor. She learned to bake bread, to make coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, to stretch ingredients to feed unexpected mouths when Asher brought home visitors or hired extra help for a big job. She learned to do laundry the hard way, heating water in huge pots, scrubbing clothes on a washboard until her knuckles were raw, hanging everything to dry in the relentless sun. She learned to iron, to mend, to turn collars and darn socks and patch worn work shirts. Her hands, once soft and pale, grew rough and red. Blisters formed and broke and hardened into calluses. Her back ached constantly for the first week until her body adjusted to the physical labor. But she also grew stronger. The constant work built muscle she had never known she possessed. She could lift heavy pots now, could haul water without stopping to rest, could stand all day without feeling faint. Her appetite increased, and Mrs. Chen made sure she ate well, pressing extra helpings on her at every meal. "You are too thin," the older woman would scold. "A good wind would blow you away. Eat, eat." Adelaide ate and worked, and slowly began to feel at home. Mrs. Chen was an excellent teacher, patient but exacting, and Adelaide learned quickly. She discovered she had a knack for organization, for anticipating what would be needed before it was asked for. Within 2 weeks, she was managing much of the household on her own, freeing Mrs. Chin to focus on the cooking and the more complex tasks. The ranch hands accepted her presence with good-natured ease. They teased her gently about her Eastern accent and her initial clumsiness, but always with respect. She learned their names and their stories. There was Tom, the foreman after Chen Wei, a taciturn man in his 40s who had fought in the war and rarely spoke of it. There was Billy, the youngest, who was saving money to buy his own place someday. There was Red, whose actual name was Robert, but whose hair justified the nickname. There was Sam, who could play the harmonica like nobody's business, and Pete and Charlie, brothers who argued constantly, but would fight anyone who threatened the other. And there was Asher, always Asher, at the center of it all. He was everywhere on the ranch, working alongside his men, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. She saw him mending fence in the brutal sun, breaking horses in the corral, riding out before dawn to check the far pastures. He was tireless, driven by something she did not quite understand. He was also unfailingly kind to her, checking in regularly to make sure she was managing, thanking her for her work, treating her as a valued member of his household rather than hired help. They fell into an easy camaraderie, talking over coffee in the quiet of early morning before the house woke, or in the evening after the men had gone to the bunkhouse. Adelaide learned about his past in bits and pieces. He had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys. His father had been a cattleman, his mother a school teacher. He had come to New Mexico after his parents died, within a year of each other, looking for a fresh start, wanting to build something of his own, rather than living in his older brother's shadows. "Do you see your brothers often?" Adelaide asked one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and purple. "Not as much as I should," Asher admitted. "They are all still in Texas, running the family ranch together. We write letters, but it has been near 2 years since I saw them in person. Life gets busy." "I understand that," Adelaide said quietly. "I have not spoken to my family since I left Philadelphia." Asher looked at her sharply. "That seems harsh. It was their choice, not mine. I disappointed them, you see. Refused to marry the man they chose, refused to overlook his infidelities and be a good, quiet wife. They said I was selfish and ungrateful." She kept her voice light, but the hurt was still there, a dull ache she had learned to live with. "Seems to me that knowing your own worth is not selfishness," Asher said slowly. "Any man would be lucky to have a woman with your strength of character." Adelaide felt her breath catch. She looked at him and found him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. The moment stretched between them, heavy with something unspoken. Then Asher looked away, clearing his throat. "Getting late. Should probably turn in." "Yes," Adelaide agreed, though she made no move to rise. "Asher?" He paused at the door. "Yes?" "Thank you for everything, for giving me a place when I had nowhere to go, for treating me with respect. It means more than you know." His expression softened. "You have earned your place here, Adelaide. You are not charity. You are part of this ranch now, part of what makes it run. Do not forget that." He went inside, leaving her alone with the cooling night air and a heart that was beating far too fast. It was around this time that Adelaide began to acknowledge, at least to herself, that her feelings for Asher had grown beyond gratitude and respect. She found herself watching for him, listening for his voice, feeling her spirits lift when he entered a room. She noticed things about him she had no business noticing, the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness in his hands when he handled a skittish horse or a frightened animal. She told herself it was foolish, this growing attraction. She was his employee, living in his house under his protection. He had shown her nothing but kindness was not attraction. He treated her exactly as he treated Mrs. Chen, with respectful courtesy. There was no reason to think he saw her as anything more than a woman he had helped out of obligation to a dead friend. But her heart, traitorous thing that it was, did not listen to reason. Mrs. Chen, who missed nothing, watched this development with knowing eyes. One afternoon in late September, when they were working together in the kitchen, preserving the last of the garden tomatoes, she spoke up. "Mr. Kendrick is good man," she said casually. "Strong, honest, kind, would make good husband for right woman." Adelaide nearly dropped the jar she was holding. "I suppose he would," she managed. "He is lonely, I think, Mrs. Chen continued. Works too hard. Needs someone to share his life, to give him a reason to slow down and enjoy what he has built. Has he courted anyone? Adelaide asked, trying to sound merely curious. Mrs. Chen shook her head. Many women in town would like his attention. He is successful, good-looking, has all his teeth. She smiled at her own joke. But he shows no interest, says he is too busy, has no time for courting. Adelaide felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. At least there was no other woman already in his life. But if he had no interest in courting anyone, her growing feelings were doubly pointless. Perhaps he is content as he is, she suggested. Mrs. Chen gave her a long look. Perhaps. Or perhaps he has not met right woman yet. Sometimes the person we need is already close by, and we are too blind to see it. Before Adelaide could respond to that loaded statement, they heard the sound of horses arriving at speed. Both women hurried to the window. A group of riders was coming in fast, and something about the way they were riding set off alarm bells. Asher emerged from the barn, followed by Tom and several other hands. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust. Adelaide recognized the lead rider as Sheriff Morrison from Hillsboro, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a thick mustache. "Asher," the sheriff called. "We have got trouble. Rustlers hit the Thompson place last night, made off with near 50 head. We are putting together a posse to track them. Could use your men if you can spare them." Asher did not hesitate. "Tom, get Red Sam and Charlie. Grab rifles and provisions for 3 days. I will get my gear." Within 15 minutes, the men were mounted and ready to ride. Adelaide watched from the porch, her stomach tight with anxiety. Rustlers could be dangerous. There might be shooting. Men might be hurt, or worse. Asher swung up onto his big roan gelding with easy grace. His eyes found Adelaide, and he rode over to the porch. "Lock the doors at night," he said quietly. "Chen Wei will be here with you, and Billy. They will watch over things. We should be back in a few days." "Be careful," Adelaide said, and was horrified when her voice cracked on the words. Asher's expression gentled. He reached down and, to her shock, touched her cheek briefly with his calloused fingers. "I will, I promise." Then he wheeled his horse and was gone, riding out with the posse in a thunder of hoofbeats. Adelaide stood on the porch long after they disappeared from sight, her hand pressed to the cheek he had touched, her heart hammering in her chest. The next 3 days were agony. Adelaide threw herself into work, trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Mrs. Chen was quiet, but Adelaide could tell she was worried too. Chen Wei was tight-lipped and watchful, keeping a rifle close at hand. Billy, young and eager, tried to act like he was not disappointed to have been left behind. On the evening of the 3rd day, as Adelaide was helping Mrs. Chen with dinner, they heard horses approaching. Adelaide's heart leapt into her throat. She rushed to the window and saw the posse riding in. She counted quickly, frantically. All of them, all the men who had left were coming back. She did not even realize she had run outside until she was standing by the corral, watching as the riders dismounted. Asher was dusty and exhausted, 3 days of beard darkening his jaw, but he was whole and unhurt. When he saw her, something flashed in his eyes, something that looked almost like joy. "We got them," he said, swinging down from his horse. "Recovered all the Thompson cattle and a good number from other ranches that had been hit. The rustlers are on their way to Santa Fe to stand trial." "Anyone hurt?" Adelaide asked, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "Not on our side. One of the rustlers took a bullet in the leg, but he will live to hang." Asher handed his reins to Billy. "I need to clean up and eat something that is not hardtack and jerky." "There is hot water on the stove," Adelaide said, "and dinner will be ready in an hour." "Adelaide." He said her name softly, and she looked up at him. "I am fine. You do not need to worry about me." "I know," she lied. "I was just concerned for all of you. It is natural to worry about people under these circumstances." Something in his expression suggested he did not quite believe her, but he did not press. He just nodded and headed toward the house. That night, after the men had eaten and retired to the bunkhouse, Asher asked Adelaide to sit with him on the porch. The September night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like someone had thrown diamonds against black velvet. "I thought about you," Asher said abruptly, "out there, tracking those rustlers. I kept thinking about how you would worry and how I needed to be careful because you would be upset if something happened to me." Adelaide's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I did worry," she admitted. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something. and I do not know how to say it properly." He turned to face her, his eyes intense in the moonlight. "When I met you on that platform, you were Harold's intended bride. You were grieving and lost, and I wanted to help because Harold would have wanted me to. But somewhere in these last weeks, something changed. I find myself looking for you, wanting to hear your voice, feeling better when you are near. I know I have no right to feel this way. You came here for a fresh start, not to be courted by your employer, but I cannot seem to help myself." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. "Asher, I have felt the same. I tried to tell myself it was gratitude, but gratitude does not make your heart race when someone walks into a room. Gratitude does not make you count the hours until you see someone again. Adelaide," he said her name like a prayer. "I am not a man of fancy words. I am a rancher, and this is a hard life. But I can promise you honesty and respect and a full heart. I can promise you a home and a partner who will stand beside you through whatever comes. If you would consider allowing me to court you properly, I would be honored." "Yes," Adelaide said, the word coming out as a laugh and a sob combined. "Yes, Asher, I would like that very much." He stood and pulled her gently to her feet. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely tender, and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Adelaide felt like she was finally truly home. The courtship by necessity was unconventional. Adelaide still worked in the house, still helped Mrs. Chen with the endless tasks of running the ranch. But now, when Asher came in for meals, he sat beside her when he could. He brought her small gifts, a handful of wildflowers, a smooth stone from the creek that was pretty when wet, a book he thought she might like that he had picked up in town. He taught her to ride, putting her up on a gentle mare named Daisy and walking alongside her until she found her balance. Soon she was riding with him around the ranch, seeing the full scope of his holdings. It was vast, thousands of acres running from the foothills of the mountains down into the flat grasslands. He showed her his favorite places, a hidden spring where the water was sweet and cold, a mesa with a view that stretched for miles, a canyon where eagles nested. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories, hopes, and dreams. Asher told her about building the ranch from nearly nothing, about the hard years when drought killed his cattle and he nearly lost everything, about the slow climb to success. Adelaide told him about her life in Philadelphia, the stifling expectations, the endless social obligations, the moment when she realized she could not live a lie to please others. "Do you miss it?" Asher asked one afternoon. They were sitting by the spring, the horses grazing nearby. "The city, the society, all of that?" Adelaide considered the question carefully. "I miss my sisters," she admitted. "I have 3 younger sisters whom I love dearly, but the rest? No. I do not miss the pretense, the judgment, the feeling that I was always performing rather than living. Here I can breathe. Here I can be myself." "And who is Adelaide Lancaster when she is being herself?" Asher asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. She smiled. "I am still figuring that out, but I know I am someone stronger than I thought, someone who can work hard and take pride in that work, someone who is not afraid of dirt under her fingernails or calluses on her hands." She held up her hands, which were indeed work-roughened now. "My mother would be appalled." Asher took her hands in his, studying them seriously. "These are the hands of someone who does not give up, who fights for what matters. These are beautiful hands." He kissed her palms, first one and then the other, and Adelaide felt heat bloom through her entire body. As autumn deepened and the weather cooled, Asher's courtship became more open. When they went to church on Sundays, he sat with her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. When they attended the harvest dance in Hillsboro, he claimed every dance with her, glaring at any cowboy who looked like he might cut in. The town began to talk, but the talk was approving. People liked Asher Kendrick, and they could see that Adelaide made him happy. In late October, Asher asked Adelaide to ride out with him to a distant part of the ranch. He was mysterious about the destination, just saying she needed to see something. They rode for over an hour, climbing into the foothills until they reached a plateau overlooking a small valley. "This is my favorite place on the whole ranch," Asher said, dismounting and helping Adelaide down. "I come here when I need to think." The view was spectacular. Below them, the valley was a patchwork of autumn colors, gold and red and green. A stream cut through it, glinting silver in the afternoon sun. Mountains rose on all sides, protective and eternal. "It is beautiful," Adelaide breathed. "I have been thinking," Asher said, and there was something in his voice that made her turn to look at him. "About the future, about what I want my life to look like. And I know, Adelaide, I know as surely as I know my own name. I want you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. I know it has only been a few months, but some things you just know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, a gold band with a small diamond, nothing like the elaborate jewelry Adelaide had worn back in Philadelphia. It was perfect. "Adelaide Lancaster, will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face. Yes, Asher, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the world narrowed to just the two of them on a mountain plateau under an endless sky. They were married in early November at the small church in Hillsboro. Adelaide wore a dress that she and Mrs. Chen had sewn together, simple but elegant in cream silk. Mrs. Chen had insisted on providing the fabric, saying it was her wedding gift. May made a bouquet of the last flowers from the garden mixed with wild asters. The church was packed. It seemed like half the territory had turned out to see Asher Kendrick get married. The ranch hands sat in the front rows, scrubbed and dressed in their Sunday best. Tom, gruff. Tom, who rarely showed emotion, wiped his eyes during the vows. Billy grinned so wide it looked like his face might split. Asher stood at the altar in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, though it still curled rebelliously at his collar. When Adelaide walked down the aisle, his face transformed. She had never seen such naked joy, such open love. It made her own eyes fill with tears. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever life brought. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Asher kissed her with a tenderness that made everyone in the church sigh. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside under the cottonwood trees. Mrs. Chen and her family had been cooking for days, and the spread was magnificent. There was music and dancing and laughter. Toasts were made, some eloquent and some fumbling, but all sincere. The celebration went on until late into the night, until the stars were bright overhead and Adelaide's feet ached from dancing. Finally, Asher swept her up in his arms, making her laugh, and carried her to the house amid cheers and catcalls from the ranch hands. He kicked the door shut behind them, blocking out the noise and leaving them alone in the quiet darkness. "Hello, Mrs. Kendrick," he murmured against her hair. "Hello, husband," she replied, and felt him shiver at the word. That night was everything Adelaide had hoped for, tender and passionate in equal measure. Asher was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt only pleasure. They learned each other slowly, mapping out the geography of skin and breath and heartbeat. When they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like coming home after a long journey. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the moonlight streaming through the window, painting silver patterns on the walls. Asher traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I keep thinking about that day at the train station," he said quietly. "If Harold had not died, if I had not been the one to meet you, we would never have had this. It makes me feel guilty, being happy because of his death." Adelaide turned to face him. "Harold gave us both a gift. He brought me here, even if he did not live to see it. And I think he would be happy to know that something good came from tragedy. We can honor his memory by living well, by being happy." Asher pulled her closer. "You are the wisest person I know." "I am practical," Adelaide corrected. "There is a difference." "I love you," Asher said. And even though they had said the words before, in this moment they felt weighted with new meaning. This was not just love, it was commitment and promise and forever. "I love you too," Adelaide whispered. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." The winter was mild by New Mexico standards, but there were still days when the wind howled down from the mountains and snow dusted the ground. Adelaide learned to manage the big house, working alongside Mrs. Chen, but increasingly taking over the planning and organizing. She discovered she had a talent for running a household, for anticipating needs and solving problems. Under her management, the house ran smoothly, the men were well fed, and there was always enough of everything. But she was not just managing a house anymore. She was building a home. She hung curtains in the windows, added small touches of beauty where she could, filled the rooms with warmth and laughter. Asher noticed every change, praising her efforts, bringing her things he thought she might like for the house. A new rocking chair for the front porch, a set of fancy dishes from the general store, a painting of mountains that reminded him of her eyes, he said, all blue and gold and full of light. Their marriage deepened as the months passed. They learned each other's rhythms, the small habits and quirks that made them individuals. Asher learned that Adelaide was not a morning person, that she needed coffee and silence before she could face the day. Adelaide learned that Asher had nightmares sometimes, dreams of the war he had been too young to fight in, but that had shaped his childhood, dreams of his parents dying. She learned to hold him through the bad dreams, to bring him back to the present with soft words and gentle touches. They also learned the joy of partnership. Asher began consulting Adelaide about ranch decisions, valuing her perspective. She had a sharp mind for business and often saw angles he had missed. Together, they planned improvements to the ranch, expansion of the herds, better irrigation for the pastures. It was not just his ranch anymore. It was theirs, a shared enterprise built on mutual respect and trust. In March, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She waited to be sure before telling Asher, going to see the doctor in Hillsboro to confirm what her body was already telling her. When she finally shared the news, Asher's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down carefully, as though she might break. "Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Asher said, his hand settling gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby. Adelaide, you have given me everything I did not even know I wanted." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Adelaide suffered from constant nausea in the first months. But Asher was attentive, bringing her cool cloths when she felt sick, sitting with her when she could not sleep, adjusting his schedule so he could spend more time with her. Mrs. Chen made special foods to tempt her appetite and fussed over her like a mother hen. As her belly grew, Adelaide felt a growing wonder. She was creating life, nurturing a tiny person who would be part her and part Asher. She felt the first flutters of movement in late May, butterfly wings against her insides. When the movements grew stronger, Asher would spend evenings with his hand on her stomach, his face full of awe every time the baby kicked. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" Adelaide asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Healthy," Asher said immediately. "That is all I care about. Healthy baby, healthy wife." He kissed her temple. "Though, if I am being honest, I kind of hope for a daughter. A little girl with your eyes and your spirit." "A son might be more practical," Adelaide pointed out. "An heir for the ranch." "We will have time for more children," Asher said confidently. "You are young and strong, but for this first one, I want a daughter. Is that strange?" "It is wonderful," Adelaide assured him. As it turned out, Asher got his wish. Adelaide went into labor on a hot September day, exactly 1 year after she had stood on the platform in Hillsboro, with nothing but a trunk and a handful of hope. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. The doctor came from town, and Mrs. Chen was there, holding Adelaide's hand and murmuring encouragement. Asher paced outside the bedroom door, refusing to leave, even though custom dictated he should wait elsewhere. Every time Adelaide cried out, he flinched as though struck. Tom finally made him sit down, pressing a glass of whiskey into his hand. "She is strong," Tom said quietly. "She will get through this." "She is in pain because of me," Asher said, his voice breaking. "If anything happens to her, I will never forgive myself." "Nothing is going to happen to her," Tom said firmly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Adelaide is tougher than you give her credit for." Finally, in the early afternoon, a baby's cry rang out. Asher was on his feet instantly, moving toward the door. Mrs. Chen emerged, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced. "A strong, healthy boy. And Adelaide is tired, but well." Asher felt his knees go weak with relief. "A son," he repeated, dazed. "Yes, and he is beautiful. Come meet him." Adelaide was propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a white blanket. Asher approached slowly, almost reverently. Adelaide smiled at him. shifting the bundle so he could see the baby's face. The baby was red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn blue like Asher's. His tiny fist was curled near his mouth, and even as they watched, he yawned enormously. "A son," Adelaide said softly. "I know you wanted a daughter, but look at him, Asher. Is he not perfect?" Asher sank down on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving the baby's face. "He is perfect," he agreed hoarsely. "And I do not care if we had a son or a daughter. You were right. Healthy is all that matters. Both of you, healthy and whole." He reached out a tentative finger, and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. "He is strong." "He is a Kendrick," Adelaide said with a tired smile. "Of course he is strong." They named him Aaron, after Asher's father. Aaron Kendrick came into the world with a lusty cry and a fierce grip, and from the first moment, Asher was utterly besotted. He was a devoted father, happy to wake in the night when the baby cried, content to walk the floor for hours if it helped Aaron sleep, endlessly fascinated by every small change and development. Adelaide watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. This strong, tough rancher was putty in the hands of a tiny baby. He spoke to Aaron in a soft voice, telling him about the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about all the things they would do together when Aaron was older. "You are going to spoil him," Adelaide teased one evening, watching Asher rock their son. "Impossible," Asher replied seriously. "You cannot spoil a baby with love. Mrs. Chen says so, and she knows everything." Adelaide laughed, and Aaron made a small sound as though agreeing. Life fell into a new rhythm, busier now with a baby to care for, but no less joyful. Adelaide learned to manage motherhood alongside her other responsibilities, though Mrs. Chen took over much of the cooking again, to give Adelaide more time with Aaron. The ranch hands were all half in love with the baby, taking turns holding him when they came in for meals, competing to make him smile. Aaron grew quickly, a healthy, happy baby who rarely fussed. He had Asher's blue eyes and Adelaide's delicate features. By 6 months, he was sitting up and laughing at everything. By a year, he was walking, toddling around the house with determination, getting into everything he could reach. "He is going to be a handful," Asher predicted, chasing after Aaron, who had just discovered the fascinating world of pots and pans in the kitchen. "He takes after his father," Adelaide replied, laughing as Asher scooped up their son, who immediately grabbed his father's nose. When Aaron was 18 months old, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier. Her body knew what to expect, and she was not as sick. She continued working through most of it, though Asher was constantly worried she was doing too much. Their second child, a daughter they named Anna, arrived on a cool spring morning with minimal fuss. She was smaller than Aaron had been, with Adelaide's dark hair and delicate features. This time, Asher did not have to pace outside. He stayed with Adelaide through the whole labor, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. When Anna was placed in his arms, Asher's eyes filled with tears. "A daughter?" he whispered. "I got my daughter after all." Anna was a quieter baby than Aaron had been, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. Aaron, now a rambunctious toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Adelaide had her hands full managing 2 small children, but she had never been happier. The years flowed by like the stream that ran through their valley. Aaron grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with his father on the ranch. Anna was more bookish, preferring to read or draw rather than play outside, but she could ride as well as any cowboy by the time she was 6. 2 more children followed, another boy named Andrew, and finally a second daughter, Alice. The ranch prospered under Asher and Adelaide's joint management. They added more land, expanded the herds, built a new barn and a larger bunkhouse. Asher trained horses on the side, developing a reputation for his skill with difficult animals. Adelaide's organizational talents extended to the business side of the ranch, and she proved to have a knack for negotiation that served them well in dealings with buyers and suppliers. But the success was not just measured in acres and cattle. It was measured in the laughter of children playing in the yard, in family dinners around a crowded table, in quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset. It was measured in the strength of a partnership built on respect and trust and abiding love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Asher and Adelaide rode out to the plateau where he had proposed. The The children were old enough now to be left with Mrs. Chen for an afternoon, though Anna had fussed about not being allowed to come along. They stood on the same spot where Asher had asked Adelaide to marry him, looking out over the valley that had changed so much and yet remained essentially the same. "Do you ever regret it?" Asher asked, his arm around Adelaide's waist. "Staying here instead of going back east? You could have had an easier life, more comfortable." Adelaide looked at him in genuine surprise. "Easier, perhaps, but better? Never. This is where I belong, Asher. With you, with our children, on this land. I found myself here, found out who I truly am. I would not trade that for all the comfort in the world." "I think about the day at the station sometimes," Asher admitted. "You standing there with that trunk, looking lost and scared and determined all at once. I lifted that trunk and I called you Harold's intended wife. But even then, some part of me knew. I knew you were going to change my life." "I stood on that platform with only a trunk," Adelaide said softly, "and you lifted it and called me wife. Not Harold's wife, as it turned out, but yours. The moment you touched my cheek before riding out with that posse, I knew. I knew I loved you. Even though it seemed impossible, even though I barely knew you, sometimes the heart knows things the mind is not caught up to yet. I loved you before that," Asher confessed. "I think I might have loved you from the first moment I saw you, standing there trying so hard to be brave. You took my breath away." They kissed, a long, slow kiss full of the passion that had not dimmed in 10 years of marriage. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Asher said, taking her hand. "We should get back before the children drive Mrs. Chen to distraction. Aaron was planning some kind of surprise for dinner, and I am terrified to find out what it is." They rode back to the ranch together, side by side as they had been for 10 years and would be for all the years to come. The house came into view, lights glowing warm in the gathering dusk. Smoke rose from the chimney. They could hear the children's voices raised in excitement or argument. It was hard to tell which. "Home," Adelaide said, and the word held everything she felt, all the love and satisfaction and deep contentment of a life well lived. "Home," Asher agreed, and his hand found hers, their fingers interlacing in a grip that had grown familiar over the years, but had never lost its power to make her heart beat faster. They dismounted in the barn, taking care of the horses together, as they always did. Aaron came running out, now a tall boy of 11, all gangly limbs and excitement. "Papa, Mama, we made dessert. Anna said I could not do it, but I did, and it is not even burned much." "Not burned much," Adelaide repeated, exchanging an amused glance with Asher. "Well, that sounds promising." Inside, the house was organized chaos. Anna was setting the table with careful precision, her 9-year-old face serious with concentration. Andrew, at 7, was underfoot as usual, and little Alice, just turned 5, was helping Mrs. Chen Bai, carrying napkins one at a time from the drawer to the table. They sat down to dinner, the whole family together. The food was excellent, as always. Aaron's dessert turned out to be a cobbler that was indeed only slightly burned around the edges, but perfectly edible. As they ate, the children chattered about their day, talking over each other in their eagerness to share. Asher caught Adelaide's eye across the table and smiled, that slow smile she loved, the one that made his whole face light up. She smiled back, feeling a surge of love so strong it was almost painful. This, she thought, this was what she had been meant for. Not the society drawing rooms of Philadelphia, not the life of polite pretense she had left behind. This family, this ranch, this rough, beautiful, honest life. She had stood on a train platform with only a trunk and a heart full of hope, and a cowboy had lifted her burden and called her wife, and in doing so had given her everything she had not even known she needed. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of challenges and joys. There were droughts that tested their resolve, and wet years that brought abundance. There were illnesses and injuries, moments of fear when a child ran fever or Asher was thrown from a horse. There were disagreements and difficult decisions, times when they argued and had to find their way back to understanding. But through it all, the foundation of their marriage remained solid. They faced every challenge together, celebrated every triumph as a team. They watched their children grow into capable, kind adults who carried forward the values they had been taught. Aaron took over more and more of the ranch work, showing a natural talent for the business. Anna became a teacher in Hillsboro, teaching the next generation of children. Andrew studied law and set up practice in Santa Fe, though he came home often. Alice, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a skilled veterinarian, one of the first women in the territory to do so. As Asher and Adelaide grew older, as their hair turned gray and their faces lined, their love deepened into something richer and more profound than passion. It became the comfortable intimacy of two people who knew each other completely, who could communicate with a glance, who fit together like two pieces of a puzzle that had been designed specifically for each other. On a warm evening in late September, 35 years after Adelaide had first stepped off the train in Hillsboro, she and Asher sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, Aaron's 3 and Anna's 2, making a joyful racket. Inside, the house was full of family who had come for the harvest celebration. "Do you know what day it is?" Asher asked, his hand finding Adelaide's as naturally as breathing. "How could I forget?" Adelaide replied. 35 years ago today, I stood on a train platform with only a trunk to my name, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. And I lifted that trunk and called you wife," Asher continued, picking up the story they had told each other, and their children and their grandchildren countless times over the years. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Adelaide corrected with a smile. "The first best was asking me to marry you." "Fair point," Asher conceded. He was quiet for a moment, watching the children play. "I have been thinking about Harold lately, about how different our lives would have been if he had not died, if you had become his wife instead of mine. I still feel guilty sometimes, being so happy because of his tragedy." "Do not," Adelaide said firmly. "We have lived a good life, Asher. We have built something worth building, raised children worth raising, loved each other worth loving. That is not something to feel guilty about. That is something to celebrate. Harold brought us together, even if not in the way anyone expected. His legacy is our family, our life. That is how we honor him." One of the grandchildren, Aaron's youngest, came running up to the porch. "Grandma, Grandpa, come see! We found a frog by the stream." Adelaide laughed. "A frog? How exciting! We will be right there." As the child scampered off, Asher stood and offered his hand to Adelaide. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They were older now, slower, but they still fit together just as they always had. They walked down to the stream where the grandchildren were gathered around their discovery. The frog, unimpressed by the attention, hopped away into the water. The children shouted in disappointment and delight, immediately beginning to plan how to catch it. Adelaide leaned against Asher, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. Around them, their family laughed and played and lived. Above them, the sky turned purple and gold as the sun sank behind the mountains. In the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied in the corral. "I love you," Asher murmured into her hair, quiet enough that only she could hear. "I love you too," Adelaide replied, the words as true now as they had been 35 years ago, as they would be for all the years they had left. She had stood on a platform with only a trunk, uncertain and afraid, but determined to face whatever came. A cowboy had lifted her burden and called her wife, and in doing so had given her a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that would last a lifetime. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible when she stepped off that train in Hillsboro, New Mexico, so many years ago. It was, quite simply, everything.